So what's the big problem with wealth creation? How do people like us, who didn't inherit a boatload of money, who are investing and building wealth from our own blood, sweat and tears, how do we invest in a way that gives us remarkable results and become financially free before retirement age? I don't know about you, but I am sick of hearing from wealth gurus and experts who don't walk their own talk and prescribe strategies that are a one-size-fits-all approach. For self-made people like you and me, I'm here to tell you that you don't need to be superhuman or already wealthy to reach financial freedom earlier than 65. This is the Alternative Investing Podcast.
Hey guys, welcome back to the podcast. It's awesome to have you tuning in again. So today should be a really fun episode. I really want to kind of unpack the elephant in the room, if you like, which is, do alternative investments really work? Now, where this actually came from was I was having a fabulous conversation earlier this week with a very conservative but astute investor. You know, we were going through a bit of the ins and outs of how do they work and, how do the deals get structured and all the rest. And he was in full agreement that they sounded awesome. And really where we got to was a point where he finally was able to express this idea of, well, how do I know they're legit? How do I know they really work? Because the theory is great, but what if it doesn't actually work in real life? So I wanted to take this episode to actually pull that question apart a little bit, because I think it's probably a question that most people have. Now, I do need to let you guys know that there's some incredibly loud rapping music going on in the room next door to me. If any of that's picked up in the podcast, we'll just treat that as cool background music. But look, this is such a fun topic and I can take this in a number of different directions. But I guess, where people are, and I completely empathize, when they hear about alternative investments, the first thought is, oh my God, there are scams. There are scammers everywhere. I think as well, given the current environment, which is full of all sorts of weird and wonderful information about, blockchain and really wild investment experiences, there's a bit of an information overload. So that can put people off as well. Some people would say, look, I've never even heard of alternative investments. That just sounds dodgy. I don't know anything about it. So if I haven't heard about it, it can't be real, right? And ultimately, I think the real fear that people have is that they don't actually want to lose any money. And obviously nobody wants to lose money, but the very nature of investing is obviously that you have to put your money into something where there is the potential risk of loss and stack the odds in your favor as much as possible. I think if you can embrace the idea that they are real and that in fact there's just a small group of ethical private experts who are specialists in this space, that you understand that it's really important to be very mindful of what you consume. So you want to stop listening to a lot of the noise that's out there in the social media and media space, accept that they are real, but they're just not common. And also, I think, understand that you only have to invest in a way where you take small steps and take small amounts of capital and put them into many deals to give yourself the opportunity to build confidence. Then I think that is a great starting point for kind of really opening your mind to this world of alternative. So I know I've done this in many, many other podcasts, but I just want to spend a couple of minutes redefining what alternative investments are the way that I think about them. So alternative investments are definitely on a spectrum. So down one end of the spectrum, you have all of the hair-raising, crazy stuff that you hear about where people become overnight millionaires. Then you've got things like hedge funds, seed capital, blockchain to some degree from my perspective, and a whole range of other investments, which definitely they're alternative. They're not mainstream, but they're certainly not, the sort of thing that your average investor wants to be involved with, because quite frankly, you could lose your shirt. Down the other end of the spectrum are a whole series of strategies that sit outside of mainstream. And it doesn't mean that it's the Wild West or anything like that. It just means for various reasons, government authorities haven't worked out how to kind of, clamp down on it and put some regulations around it in a way that makes it available to your average mainstream investor. Doesn't mean that it is hair-raising risk or anything like that. In fact, quite the opposite. But the space that I am specifically talking about at this end is actually only investing deals which are backed by real property. So that's the space that we're talking about. So for those people who are already property investors, when I talk to them about the strategies in this space, they pick them up immediately. They understand exactly what they're about and they can understand how the deals are structured. The funny part about these sorts of deals though is that, real estate deals are obviously dime a dozen, but the creative way in which these deals are structured using non-mainstream strategies is why they are so lucrative, and it is why the deals allow themselves to produce such great cash flow. So that's kind of what I wanted to say about, redefining alternatives. So just to quickly, again, the 5 buckets of strategies are private funds, small private funds, syndications, joint ventures, lending deals, and then turnkey real estate. They're the 5 big buckets. So the story of who prompted this podcast, as I said to you, was a younger investor who has effectively maybe dipped their toe into a couple of real estate deals, but has effectively been sitting on a boatload of cash, partly because they don't have the bandwidth to go out and find deals or even think about investing, but partly because there's a sense that the market is a bit wobbly right now and they don't really believe that investing in either shares or real estate is necessarily going to give them the outcome that they want. The point that I had to make to this guy though was that, while I do think it is a great time in history to be keeping, bigger than average adequate cash reserves, to have that amount of cash sitting around underperforming also didn't make sense, particularly given the inflation that we're experiencing right now. So, I felt for this particular investor, alternative investments could be in good alignment because from a risk perspective, you're able to quantify the risk and de-risk these deals as much as possible. They don't require a rising market, which is another reason that alternative investments in my world make a huge amount of sense. And they have a lot more immunity to volatility, meaning that yes, asset values can vary, but the cash flow remains relatively steady. And that's why they're such a game changer for many people. So if I were going to answer the question, do alternative investments work? And will they work for me? The answer is hell yes, they absolutely work. I've really dedicated the last few years of my life getting to know people in this space and just wondering how my life would have been so different had I not stumbled across these strategies. So the answer is yes, they absolutely do work, but I don't know that that's necessarily what you guys are wanting to hear. But if I were to unpack a little bit around who are they for and who are they not for, maybe that would be, I guess, a more useful starting point. So just quietly, if you're a brand new investor and you are just trying to get out of the gates and find some investments to get you on your way, I probably wouldn't advocate alternative, because although you can apply leverage, you can't do it in the same way as going to a bank and controlling a piece of real estate in your local market, which might grow 5 to 10% every year. Over time, that will give you a very good capital base, and that is certainly what you need to focus on when you start out in the spring of your investment journey. Who they are for people who maybe have moved into summer, meaning they've applied leverage, they've grown their capital to as big a pie as they possibly can, and now they're just letting time do the heavy lifting. Maybe they've hit a bit of a ceiling with borrowings, or maybe they're not comfortable with borrowing any more money. Maybe they've kind of optimized their investments as much as they can, but they realize there's still a gap between where they are and where they want to be. Now, what most investors tend to do, I would say what 95% of investors tend to do when they hit their ceiling with borrowing, or they kind of decide to tap out of buying or accumulating any more real estate, they basically just use any surplus income at that point to enjoy life and just wait for time to do the heavy lifting and give them that growth in net worth that they want. But if you're like me and you don't like the idea of retiring at 65 and you want that freedom to step off sooner, then going and applying a small percentage of that capital to alternative investments makes a whole lot of sense, because you can shave easily a couple of decades off your timeline to hitting your financial goals. So really, it's people who've not in spring, so not your newbie investors, maybe your more seasoned summer investors, meaning that you've really focused on getting traction with your investments and now you're sort of starting to plateau. Definitely people in autumn. People in autumn are looking to optimize the capital that they have. They want to take a small percentage of their pie and just make it work a little harder. And then moving into winter, if you're someone in winter, it means your primary focus is on preservation and things like legacy, things like, just looking after the capital that you have and keeping it ticking over nicely. Then again, so top of summer, autumn and winter, definitely the right time to be thinking about alternative. Will they work for you? The real answer to that question is probably based more on, what investments you actually undertake. When people come and work with me, they say to me, where's the biggest risk in what you're doing? Like, how could this go wrong? And obviously, there's no guarantees with any kind of investing, but the biggest risk in everything to do with alternative investment is to do with the deal maker. Who are you relying on as an investor to put the deal together and to execute on the deal? Because you could have the best real estate deal in the world and have a really poor operator or a poor executor, and it can fall flat on its face and everyone can lose their money. Similarly, you can have a really average deal and just have someone with an awesome track record who knows exactly what to do to turn that into a really profitable deal. So the biggest risk in the whole equation is who you rely on. And that's why where I have spent the most time in my program and in my trusted advisor network is curating the who, because in my experience, the who is what will transform your wealth. The who is what will transform your access to A-grade opportunities. The who are the people who are at the coalface, who feel the tremors in the market and can warn you about those long before you start hearing about them in the media. So guys, I hope that kind of answers the question, do alternative investments work and will they work for me? Because I think the ultimate kind of message with this podcast is they work for anyone really. But like everything in life, it's always about timing. Think about the person that you're with, your partner. Had you met them a few years earlier or a few years later, maybe it wouldn't have worked out. But sometimes just meeting the right person at the right time can result in a fantastic lifelong union. But with investments, it's a little bit like you've got to pick for the season that you're in, for the cycle of your journey that you're on, what investments make sense right now. And I think if you can look through that filter, then, thinking about whether alternative investments will work for you or not is easy. And then really the final piece around do they actually work is really an exploration and an increasing of your education that will really ultimately determine that for you. So guys, I hope this was helpful. I'm super excited about some of the podcast episodes that we've got lined up. I've got a couple of people who I might even bring on as guests. If you've got any questions on this, if this question of will alternative investments work for me, if that's crossed your mind and you want to ask me something specifically that I haven't covered today, please reach out, send me an email, salena@inkosiwealth.com. But otherwise, till next time, take care.
You've been listening to the Alternative Investing Podcast. If you're feeling frustrated that despite doing everything right in the property investing playbook and you're no closer to financial freedom, then head on over to inkosiwealth.com to learn more about how you can use alternative investments to catapult your investing income and blend strategies to shave decades off your timeline to financial freedom. See you on the next episode.